Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into a fascinating, almost theatrical saga that has been dubbed the Battle of Consciousness.
Right.
It's a story where these grand pronouncements, they really meet stark realities, a narrative shaped not just by economic policy, but by, well, the performance of power.
Absolutely.
And right at the heart of it all, we're going to reveal something quite surprising, something our sources are calling the Fennec fox.
Interesting name.
Yeah. You sent us a stack of incredibly insightful sources detailing a pretty significant U.S.-China economic showdown, right? A period of intense global friction.
That's right, yeah. A lot of material to go through.
So our mission today is to extract the most important, nuggets of knowledge and insight from all this, helping you understand not just what happened, but why it truly matters.
The bigger picture.
Exactly. In the broader landscape of international relations and global economics, we'll try to connect the dots, reveal some surprising facts, and perhaps even give you a few genuine aha moments.
Yeah, about how power is projected, how it's perceived on the world stage.
Precisely.
What's particularly fascinating here, and it really sets the tone, is that our sources kick off with this very vivid quote. It's about exaggerated amazement.
Exaggerated amazement, okay.
Yeah, a description that, maybe surprisingly, seems to apply directly to the central figure in this economic drama, the U.S. president who, as our sources point out, has been in the White House.
So right from the start, they're framing it this way.
Exactly. It immediately signals that our deep dive isn't just about, dry economic data or trade numbers.
Like it's more nuanced.
It's about perception, it's about how narratives get constructed, and maybe even about a certain theatricality in global politics.
Where the performance can sometimes overshadow the underlying reality.
Precisely. It's a crucial lens, I think, through which to view the subsequent actions and reactions in this, well, pretty complex economic conflict.
So let's start right there then, with that initial observation. The sources open with a striking quote attributed to Al Lemby, saying, in the movie, a man who exaggerates and looks at him like this. Exaggerated amazement, exaggerating it in everything. Exaggerated.
Wow, that's quite the quote to start with.
It is, and it's not just, a colorful opening line. Our sources immediately apply this observation directly to the U.S. president.
Okay, so they're drawing a direct parallel.
Yeah, it frames the entire narrative we're about to explore. It suggests a consistent pattern of behavior characterized by these grand declarations, public posturing.
That might not always line up with what's actually happening on the ground.
Exactly. It's as if the sources are inviting us to view this whole scenario like a play.
Where the lead actor's dramatic flair and how the audience sees it are just as important, maybe even more so, than the actual plot unfolding.
This battle of consciousness, they call it. It's there from page 1 of these sources.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of behavior, this exaggerated amazement thing, it certainly suggests a pattern. Something that maybe precedes this specific economic showdown with China.
Right, not an isolated incident.
Not at all. The material highlights an earlier instance that serves as a pretty powerful illustration of this tendency, the grand claims versus the underlying reality.
Okay.
They bring up an incident concerning Iran as a prime example of this very dynamic playing out, just on a different geopolitical stage.
Ah, Iran. Okay, so that gives us some context.
It really does. It gives us a crucial analytical lens, sort of a way to view the subsequent actions in the U.S.-China economic sphere. It's almost like the sources are giving us a primer.
A primer on the rhetorical style and maybe the strategic approach we should expect.
Yeah, exactly. As we delve deeper into this whole thing.
Tell us then what exactly happened with Iran that, according to these sources, so clearly foreshadows this U.S.-China narrative. How did that scenario unfold?
Well, the sources describe a situation where the U.S. president made these very strong, very public claims. He was on the verge of, quote, finishing Iran after a specific military strike.
Okay, strong words.
Very strong. But the narrative provided by the sources immediately contrasts this with what they say was a prior alleged attempt to trick Iran into stopping missile attacks.
Trick Iran. Interesting phrasing.
It is. And
Yeah.
the material even mentions the involvement of Qatari officials.
Okay, intermediaries.
Exactly. According to the sources, they were brought in to intervene, to calm things down. The implication is that these third-party intermediaries were crucial in mediating a de-escalation.
Sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah, essentially acting to, as the sources vividly put it, talk to them so that they just stop the beating. Enough.
Wow, okay, so diplomacy was happening, but the public message was different.
Very different. Then, after this complex, often behind-the-scenes de-escalation, the president supposedly came back to the public narrative claiming, "I was going to finish, I was."
And the source's reaction?
Well, the sources mockingly retort, "Why didn't you finish?" It paints this picture of a striking disparity.
Between the aggressive public talk of overwhelming power
And the reality of complex, negotiated de-escalation, where involving third parties like Qatar was actually instrumental in bringing a volatile situation under control.
So the public declaration served, well, a different purpose than the actual strategy or outcome.
Seems that way. The narrative for public consumption.
So it's almost like someone who has just been, severely beaten, maybe even humiliated in a fight, then stands up, brushes themselves off, and declares, "I caught him and humiliated him."
Exactly. It's a complete reversal of the perceived reality. A narrative spun for the public rather than a reflection of what actually went down.
This battle of consciousness is definitely at play from the very beginning then.
Precisely. And this raises a crucial question, one the sources really compel us to consider. For whose benefit were these words spoken, especially after the immediate heat of the moment had passed?
Right, when the situation had actually been diffused through these intermediaries.
Yeah, and why re-engage with that narrative? Why keep amplifying it, even when, as the sources rather bluntly state, the individual is sitting on the bench all day arranging posts and people are pointing them out?
It's a good question.
This seemingly unrelated anecdote from the sources, it sets a really crucial precedent for understanding the U.S.-China dynamic we're about to explore.
It establishes a pattern, you mean?
Yeah, a pattern of grandstanding and a significant disconnect between what's declared, the intentions or outcomes proclaimed, and the actual facts on the ground.
It suggests we should be skeptical, that what we hear and what actually happens might be two very different things.
Exactly. And that this battle of consciousness isn't just about economics or geopolitics, but profoundly about shaping public perception, controlling the narrative.
Regardless of the objective reality.
Right. It primes us to question the win from the very start of this whole U.S.-China thing.
Fascinating. Okay, so with that preamble, that context of exaggerated claims and this specific style of leadership.
One that prioritizes narrative.
Right. Let's pivot now to the economic sphere. Before this battle of consciousness erupted there, what was the global economic landscape like, according to our sources? They seem to suggest things were relatively stable.
Yeah, maybe even surprisingly favorable for the United States in a way.
How so?
Indeed, the sources paint a picture where, in their words, the world was going well and people were exporting and importing. Pretty straightforward.
Okay, basic global trade humming along.
Right. And from the U.S. perspective, they were apparently hiding from the Chinese and taking their resources, specifically dollars from them, in the form of treasury bills.
The treasury bill dynamic. China holding U.S. debt.
Exactly. This deep financial interdependence contributed to significant global public debt, with the U.S. alone accumulating, well, a staggering $40 trillion at one point, according to these sources.
40 trillion. That's a number.
It certainly is. Now, just to be clear for listeners, when China buys U.S. Treasury bills, they're essentially lending money to the U.S. government.
Right. It's not just China sending cash over.
No, it creates this profound financial interdependence. China holds a significant chunk of U.S. national debt.
Which gives them a vested interest in the dollar's stability.
And, by extension, the health of the U.S. economy. This relationship, while creating huge public debt for the U.S., also maintained a certain economic equilibrium.
How did that work exactly?
Well, dollars flowed to China for the goods they produced, right? And then much of those dollars flowed back to the U.S. through these financial instruments, these treasury bills.
Helping to finance U.S. public spending.
Precisely. It was a symbiotic relationship, maybe a bit asymmetrical, but it characterized that pre-conflict stability.
Okay, so if things were, as the sources say, going well, and the U.S. was benefiting from this system.
Right, this established system of finance and trade.
What prompted the sudden aggressive shift? What started the fire, as the sources put it? Why disrupt this seemingly beneficial status quo?
That's the key question, isn't it?
It seems like an unprovoked attack on a system that was, from one angle, pretty advantageous to the U.S. Was it a strategic miscalculation, or was this all about that battle of consciousness?
Projecting strength, regardless of the economic cost.
Yeah.
Well, the sources describe a very decisive, remarkably unilateral move. The U.S. president, in their phrasing, imposed his people on China, hitting and hitting. There's no insult.
Hitting and hitting. aggressive language.
Very. It refers to the... Oh, not at all. The sources suggest a truly dramatic and swift escalation.
How dramatic.
Well, the sources detail this rapid and substantial escalation. It shows just how aggressive the policy was. From an initial 5%.
Okay, 5% manageable maybe?
The tariffs quickly jumped to 55%, then 104%, then 145%, ultimately reaching a staggering 245% customs on Chinese exports to America.
245%. Wow. That's not a tariff. That's practically a blockade.
It created an immense barrier to trade, absolutely, designed to make Chinese goods prohibitively expensive in the U.S. market.
It fundamentally altered the terms of trade.
Completely, acting as a powerful disincentive for American businesses to import from China. This wasn't a precision strike. It was, like you said, more like an economic sledgehammer.
Intended to force a complete rethink of supply chains, manufacturing.
Exactly, and definitely not a subtle move on the global economic chessboard. The scale was unprecedented in modern U.S. trade policy. It signaled a clear intent to just disrupt the existing order.
So how did China react to this aggressive, escalating move? Did they just take it?
No, not surprisingly. China, of course, responded in kind.
Okay, retaliation.
Yeah, by imposing 145% customs duty on American exports to China.
So hitting back just as hard almost.
Pretty much. A U.S. product going to China would face a similarly hefty tariff, making American goods just as uncompetitive in the Chinese market.
So tit for tat.
Right. And the sources, they characterize this initial U.S. decision